You know that moment when you're driving home at night, the road is black, the rain starts, and your headlights look like two dying candles behind a layer of milk? That is not just ugly, that is expensive, dangerous, and incredibly frustrating. Because the first thing most people hear is, you probably need new headlight assemblies. And on a lot of modern cars, that can mean hundreds, sometimes over $1,000, for what looks like a little haze on the surface. Now here's the wild part. People online will tell you there's a miracle fix. A cheap powder, sometimes called a $1 secret. Rub it on, and foggy headlights turn crystal clear. Permanently. Sounds fake. It should sound fake. Because part of that story is true, and part of it is exactly why so many people waste money, waste time, and end up right back where they started a few months later. And this is where it gets interesting. The powder is real, the clarity is real, the science is real, but the permanence? That depends on something most people never hear about. Because foggy headlights are not usually dirty headlights. They are damaged headlights. The cloudy layer you see is often the lens itself breaking down in sunlight, weather, and road abuse. So if someone gives you a polish without explaining what's actually failing, they're not fixing the problem. They're just changing how it looks for a while. And this is the part most people miss. The real secret was never just the powder, it was understanding what material modern headlights are made from, why car makers switched to it, and what has to happen after the haze is removed if you want the result to last. So yes, there is a low-cost material that can transform a cloudy surface. Yes, the auto industry has benefited from the fact that most drivers don't understand what they're looking at. But the biggest reveal is not some magic ingredient hidden in a garage forum. It's that modern headlights were designed around a trade-off. And once you understand that trade-off, the entire restoration game makes sense. Because the question is not, can you make them clear? The real question is, why did they turn cloudy in the first place, and what does it actually take to stop it from coming back? To understand why this cheap powder even entered the conversation, you have to go back before foggy plastic lenses, before restoration kits, before sleek LED signatures and sculpted front ends. For decades, headlights were mostly glass. Hard, stable, scratch-resistant, and far less likely to go yellow from sunlight. Old sealed beam lamps were simple. If the unit failed, you replaced the unit. Crude by modern standards, but optically honest. Then the design language of cars changed. Automakers wanted more aerodynamic shapes, more freedom, lighter weight, better impact resistance, and more complex front-end styling. Glass started to lose that battle. It was heavier, it was easier to shatter, it was harder to mold into the dramatic shapes designers wanted. That opened the door for polycarbonate plastic, the same family of material that became famous for being light, tough, and extremely impact-resistant. That switch solved one problem and created another. Polycarbonate is strong, but it is not invincible, especially under years of sun, so manufacturers added protective hard coats and UV-resistant layers to keep those lenses clear. When that protection is fresh, the system works. The lens stays transparent, the beam stays strong, the car looks modern, but time is merciless. Sunlight, sand, road debris, heat cycling, car wash chemicals, and oxidation slowly attack that outer layer. Once the protection begins to fail, the lens starts to haze, yellow, pit, and scatter light. Now enter the powder. Long before it became a garage legend, cerium oxide had a completely different reputation. It comes from cerium, a rare earth element identified in the early 1800s. By the 20th century, cerium oxide became known as a powerful polishing agent for glass. Not plastic. Glass, optics, windshields, crystal, fine surfaces where clarity mattered and where ordinary abrasives could be too crude. Mixed with water into a slurry, it helped polish glass by combining mechanical abrasion with a chemical interaction at the surface. In other words, it didn't just grind, it refined. That history matters, because it explains why people started reaching for it when headlight lenses went cloudy. On the surface, the logic sounds perfect. If a material can restore clarity to glass, maybe it can rescue a hazy headlight too. And sometimes it appears to. That's how myths are born, not from total nonsense, but from partial success. But the real story took shape when the car world moved from glass headlights to plastic lenses, while the public kept thinking about them like they were still glass. People treated fogging like a stain instead of material failure. They searched for cleaners when the real issue was degradation. They looked for a miracle polish when the actual battle was against the death of a protective coating. And this is where the economic angle creeps in. Replacement is easy to sell. A whole new assembly sounds safe, official, guaranteed. Restoration is trickier. It requires understanding, labor, process. Sometimes multiple abrasive steps, sometimes coating chemistry. That complexity created an opening for everything from smart DIY methods to gimmicks in a bottle. Quick shine sold better than real explanation. So the forgotten invention here is not just the powder, it's the idea that a damaged lens could be restored at all. That you could remove the failed outer layer, rebuild the surface, and bring back performance without buying an entire new unit. That knowledge has floated around body shops, detailers, and patient DIY circles for years. But it rarely gets explained clearly because "rub this magic stuff on" is a much better headline than "modern polymer optics fail in layers and require surface correction plus UV reprotection." Here's the simplest way to think about a foggy headlight. Imagine a clear window with sunscreen baked into the outer skin. For years, that sunscreen takes the punishment. Sunlight hits it, heat hits it, tiny particles hit it at highway speed. Eventually, that outer skin degrades. It stops being truly clear. It becomes yellow, rough, chalky, or crazed with microscopic damage. The light still turns on, but it has to fight its way through a damaged surface. That means two bad things happen at once. First, less light gets through. Second, the light that does get through gets scattered. So instead of a strong, useful beam reaching down the road, you get a weaker, fuzzier output. The road looks dimmer, contrast drops, night driving feels harder. And because this deterioration happens slowly, many drivers don't realize how much performance they've lost until the lenses are restored. Now, why can a powder help? Because polishing works by removing defects from the surface. If the damage is shallow enough, an abrasive or chemical-mechanical polish can level the rough outer layer until light passes through more cleanly again. That is why sanding and polishing can make a shocking visual difference. You are not washing away fog, you are removing damaged material. But the real reason matters even more than the result. If the haze is inside the plastic, surface polishing won't fully solve it. If the lens is deeply cracked, crazed, or structurally failing, restoration has limits. And if you remove the damaged UV layer without replacing protection, you may create a lens that looks amazing today and ages even faster tomorrow. This is where a lot of viral advice quietly collapses. Cerium oxide is excellent for glass because it was built for that job. On glass, especially silica-based surfaces, it has a chemistry advantage. On polycarbonate headlight lenses, it is not the perfect hero people make it out to be. It may help refine a surface or improve clarity in some cases, but modern headlight restoration usually works best as a system. Clean, sand away the failed layer, polish the scratches down, and then add back a UV-resistant coating or another real protective barrier. And this is the part most people never hear. The coating is not an optional finishing touch. It is the difference between a temporary cosmetic win and a restoration that actually has a chance to last. Think of it like sanding dead paint off a piece of outdoor furniture. If you stop at smooth wood, it may look good for a moment, but if you leave it raw in the sun and rain, the damage comes back. Headlights are the same. Once the failed outer skin is stripped off, the lens needs protection again. So when somebody says a $1 powder fixes headlights permanently, the science says something more precise. A low-cost abrasive or polish may help restore optical clarity. Permanence depends on whether the damaged layer was fully corrected, how much healthy material remains, and whether the surface is properly protected from UV afterward. That sounds less magical, but it's more useful, and it explains why some restorations fail in months, while others hold up far longer. Now compare that to what happens in the real world. The cheapest fixes usually focus on immediate appearance: toothpaste, random metal polish, baking soda mixtures, fast wipes, solvents that temporarily wet the surface and make it look clearer for a day or a week. These methods spread because they are cheap, easy, and satisfying on camera. But short-term clarity is not the same thing as long-term restoration. Proper kits do something different. They usually use multiple sanding stages to remove the oxidized layer, then refine the surface, then apply some kind of protectant. That is why tested restoration kits often work noticeably better than quick hacks. But even then, there's a catch. Many DIY systems are still not permanent. Real-world testing has shown that haze can return, often becoming noticeable again after around a year, especially when the protective step is weak or the car lives in intense sun. This is where things change. The best modern restorations don't rely on a single miracle ingredient. They rely on process and protection. A dedicated UV-resistant clear coat, a properly cured coating, or a durable protective film gives the lens a fighting chance. Without that, you're just exposing fresh polycarbonate to the same sunlight that ruined the original surface. So why do automakers use polycarbonate at all if it creates this headache? Because it solves so many other problems. It is lighter than glass, much more impact-resistant, easier to mold into aerodynamic and stylish shapes, better for modern front-end packaging. In other words, car makers did not choose plastic because they wanted your headlights to fail. They chose it because the trade-offs made sense across safety, design, manufacturing, and efficiency. But there is still a quiet incentive problem. Selling complete assemblies is simple. It keeps the repair official and standardized. And on many newer vehicles, headlight units are packed with LEDs, modules, sensors, and expensive housings. That drives replacement prices up fast. Suddenly, a cloudy outer lens can lead to a quote that feels absurd, even if the internal light source still works fine. That's the big auto exposed part in real terms. Not a secret cartel hiding a miracle dust. Something more ordinary and more believable. A system where replacement is easier to monetize, while real restoration knowledge stays fragmented among detailers, body shops, niche forums, and patient DIYers. The public ends up bouncing between overpriced replacement and underpowered hacks, never getting the full picture. And the full picture is simple. Fast shine is easy. Lasting optical restoration is harder. The more a method skips abrasion control, surface correction, and UV reprotection, the more likely it is to disappoint. So what should someone actually do today? First, diagnose the problem honestly. If the lens is cloudy on the outside, yellowed, rough, or pitted, restoration may work very well. If the haze is on the inside, if moisture is trapped in the housing, or if the lens is deeply cracked and brittle, polishing the exterior will not perform miracles. That distinction saves a lot of wasted effort. Second, understand the goal. If you just want a quick cosmetic improvement before selling a car, a simple polish might be enough. If you want better night visibility and a result that lasts, you need a full restoration approach. That means removing the failed surface in controlled stages, refining it, and then sealing it with real UV protection. Third, be realistic about the so-called powder fix. If the powder in question is cerium oxide, know what it was designed for. It has a real history as a glass polishing compound. It is not pure nonsense. But a modern polycarbonate headlight is not a windshield and not a crystal vase. On plastic lenses, the smarter approach is usually purpose-built headlight restoration materials, and most importantly, a serious protective top layer, and this is where people can actually save money. A decent restoration can dramatically improve output and postpone replacement. On an older car, that can be a huge win. On a newer car with expensive assemblies, it can feel like financial rescue. But the savings come from doing the right steps, not believing in a miracle shortcut. There are limits, of course. Severely degraded lenses may have deep pitting or internal damage that no surface process can fully reverse. Some restorations will still age faster than a brand new OEM lens, and any coating can eventually fail under harsh use. But that doesn't make restoration fake. It just means the honest promise is not forever. The honest promise is substantially better, safer, cheaper than replacement in many cases, and longer lasting when properly protected. That is practical knowledge, not flashy, just valuable, because once you understand the material, you stop getting fooled by labels. You stop buying products based on dramatic before and after shots alone. You start asking the only questions that matter. What exactly is this removing? What exactly is this protecting? And how long should this realistically last in sunlight, weather, and daily driving? So let's close the loop. The $1 powder story survives because it contains a piece of truth. Surface polishing can absolutely transform a foggy headlight, in some cases, shockingly well, and that feels like discovering hidden knowledge the car world never told you. But the deeper truth is even more useful. Foggy headlights are usually a materials problem, not a cleaning problem. The cloudiness comes from the breakdown of a protective outer layer on polycarbonate lenses. Restoration works by removing that failed layer and refining the surface. Lasting restoration works by putting protection back. That is the real reveal. Not that a magic powder beats the entire auto industry, but that most people are sold the wrong story. They are taught to choose between expensive replacement and fake shortcuts, when the real answer sits in the middle. Understand the lens, correct the damage, and protect the surface properly. And once you see that, the whole mystery changes. The miracle was never the powder. The miracle was knowing what the haze actually was. If you enjoy learning practical knowledge that most people overlook, consider subscribing.